So you're out of position on the river, but you probably have the best hand. You're supposed to bet, right? Bet for value. That's the rule, right? Well, usually, but not always. Sometimes it's best to actually check to your opponent and let him try to bluff into you. Let's take a look at an example to see how that works. Welcome to another episode of Exceptional Poker Video. In this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about inducing a bluff on the river. It's kind of an interesting example. It comes from a hand that was played during a recent coaching session I did with a new student of mine. He's a pretty solid player. He's a level 1 player moving up into kind of level 2 poker. Got a couple of small leaks in his game that's costing him the ability to actually become a consistent winning player. But one of the areas that he's struggling with is really understanding why he's betting. Before you pull the trigger with a bet or a re-raise, you've got to know why. And a lot of players, way too many players, in fact, often kind of play on autopilot. They know they're supposed to raise ace king, right? They see the pros do it. They see the videos where they're doing it, and they think, I'm supposed to raise ace king here, and they never really think what they're trying to achieve. Is that raise as a bluff? Are they trying to get someone else to fold with a better range or better hand? Are they trying to build value? It's a good question, and a lot of players, including some pretty advanced intermediate players and some solid players that I know of, often really don't know why they're betting. So let's take a quick step back and look at why we bet in poker. Again, there's one of two reasons that we bet. If you've been reading my blog, you know this. I beat this into everybody's heads over and over in a lot of my blog posts, but it's so fundamental and it's so important. You really have to understand this. We bet in poker for one of two reasons. There's a number of reasons we bet, but there's really two primary reasons that you should be betting. And especially at micro and small stakes tables, you should be betting primarily for the first of these, and that is for value. You're betting because you think your hand is best. You think you can build a pot and get a worse hand to call. It's that simple. That's called a value bet. And that's why, a lot of times we bet in poker. The other reason is as a bluff. You're trying to get somebody with a better hand than yours to fold. If you can't answer yes to to the question of I'm betting for value or as a bluff when you're deciding to bet or raise, you probably shouldn't be betting. And this is a good example. This particular hand is a very good example of that, especially on the river when we actually check to our opponent, because betting for value, even though we have the best hand, isn't actually going to accomplish what a value bet is supposed to accomplish, and that is to get a worse hand to call. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so here we are. We're in a zone poker game on Ignition. This is a $5 table. And we pick up ace-10 off under the gun. And I'm letting my student just play the hand. We're talking through it while he's playing it, and he's kind of explaining his thought process. And he raises to 15 cents, which is really good. And why is he betting here? Because he's probably got the best hand. Ace-10 is ahead of a lot of range here. Of the opponent's range left to act, and it's a pretty strong hand, so we're betting because it's a good solid hand for value. We get cold called on the button by the 5 seat, who's got us covered. So the first thing we notice is that, he's got 655 in his stack. It's a bit of an exaggeration to say that stack sizes are a great tell, but they're not a bad tell. And if somebody's got, significantly more than the starting stack, it means they're probably doing something right at these stakes. So you've got to give them a little credit until you know a little bit more about them. So this player cold calls us on the button. And so the question is, what does he have in his range here? And so it's kind of obvious he doesn't have things like aces or kings, right? He would have re-raised us. And he also doesn't have a lot of crappy hands like 7 deuce off or 10-4 offsuit or things like that, because he's a reasonable player and he would have just muck those hands. So we can kind of put him on middling range hands. Maybe ace queen, that's really at the top end of his range. He's re-raising ace king here, for example, 9 times out of 10. So ace queen might be at the top of his range, and all the way down through, through the middle pairs, all the way down to small pairs. Maybe some suited connectors, maybe some big broadways. Those kind of hands are in his range, and that's kind of where we start. We assume he's calling with those kind of hands. And against those hands, our ace 10 is, it's okay. We're not crushing that range by any manner of means. We're in a coin flip with most of the pairs that he's calling with. Some of the upper end of his aces, he's got us crushed and dominated. But some of the smaller broadways, we've got him beat. So, we're just going to have to play poker here, and depending upon board texture, we're going to determine whether we're going to see bet or not. So let's see what happens. Okay, so the board comes out ace queen 7 with 2 diamonds. So we hit top pair. We've got a good kicker, not a great kicker. And so we probably do have the best hand. There's diamonds out. There are hands that he might call one street with here, worse hands if we bet. So a bet for value is very appropriate here. And in fact, that's what my student does. He goes ahead and he fires a continuation bet for value on this, a little more than half pot. He decides to bump it up to about 23 cents, which might be a little bit low. But he gets called. He gets called relatively quickly there, and that's kind of interesting. It tells me that things like deuces trays, pair of 4s, pair of 5s, pair of 6s, probably not in his range anymore. He wouldn't call. Maybe perhaps he would call one street. Most players, good players, won't. But the fact that he snap called that quickly tells me he didn't really have to think about this too much, and he just folded, or he would have just folded there. So he snap called. So those kind of hands are out of his range. And the same with maybe 8s and 9s and 10s. Jacks, maybe he's calling. Any queen in his hand, ace queen, king queen, queen jack, queen 10. Probably calling here. A number of his aces he's calling for sure. If he's got diamonds, he's calling. So his range has just gotten a little bit stronger. And so we've got to keep that in mind here. And we might want to exercise a little caution moving forward. Now, on the turn, it's a blank. It's a 5 of spades. And we said that we think that he would have folded out hands like a pair of 5s out of his range there on the flop. So that 5 doesn't hit his range at all. Maybe ace 5 is in his range here, and he's just gotten 2 pair. But that's such a small fraction or sliver of his range that it's not really something we have to worry about here. And so what my student does here is he goes ahead and he bets again. He decides again a little bit more than half pot. He thinks he still has the best hand, so he's betting for value here. I don't think he minds if the bad guy folds, but he's trying to extract a little bit more value here. And the fact that the villain is not re-raising us is giving us a little bit of comfort. And indeed, the villain just calls on the turn, which tells us that he probably doesn't have a super strong hand here. He's got showdown value probably, and that's why he's calling. He's got a piece of this flop. He wants to see a river. He wants to maybe see a cheap showdown or see a third diamond come out on the river or something like that. And we're not going to let him. We're going to go ahead and bet again here, depending upon what the river brings. And the river brings a really good card for us. It brings out another ace, which reduces the possibility of aces in our villain's range significantly. 3 of the aces are accounted for elsewhere. There's 2 aces on the board. There's 1 in our hand, so he can only have that remaining ace of hearts in his hand. So it's more, or it's less likely. I was going to say more unlikely. It's less likely than that the opponent has an ace in his hand. There's still some hands in his range like ace jack and ace 10, like ours, that are still in his hand. But the fact that he just called the turn makes that less likely. And now combinatorically, with our blocker and the two ace blockers on the board, it's much less likely he's got an ace. So it's much more likely he's got a queen in his hand. He's got king, queen, queen, jack, queen 10. Again, maybe a couple of diamonds. There are some hands that beat us here, a set of sevens. But again, most players try to bump it up on the turn here when they've got a big, strong hand like that. And they'll be betting, raising us on the turn. So we can reduce the likelihood of that in his range here. So we've almost certainly got the best hand. And so the question is, do we bet? If we've got the best hand 9 times out of 10 or 95 times out of 100, you should be betting for value at the micros. You don't screw around. Fancy play syndrome does not have a big place in play here at the micros. You play your value hand straightforwardly and you get paid off. Here, though, things are a little bit different. And so the question is, it goes back to, why are we betting? We bet for value, we bet as a bluff. Now, we have value here. So bluffing, we're not going to get this guy to fold a better hand than us. If he's got a set of sevens, there's no amount of money we're going to put into the pot is going to make him fold that hand. So bluffing is not even possible. So we have to rule that out of our range, and in fact, or out of our actions. And more importantly, we've already decided that most likely we've got the best hand here. And so we've got a value hand. And when you've got a value hand, you should bet. But you have to also take that step and ask yourself, if I bet, will he call with worse hands? What fraction of his range is he going to call? Well, if he's got a weak ace, which again we said is pretty unlikely, yeah, he'll probably call here. If he's got a queen, maybe he'll call, but boy, that second ace that just flopped out came on the river, and if we bet into him, has got to scare the heck out of him, and he's probably going to be folding almost all of his queens. In other words, we've got a value hand, but betting for value is not going to accomplish what a value bet is supposed to accomplish, and that is get a worse hand to call. So my student here thinks about it for a bit, and we actually talked during this hand, and he was going to go ahead and fire, and then we talked a little bit about, okay, well, why are you betting? And it became obvious that a check is the right thing to do, with the intention of inducing a bluff. If we check here, it kind of looks suspicious. It looks like, okay, now we're afraid of that ace. What's going on? And if he's got a queen in his hand, he may just well take a stab at us. If we bet here, it's a very high likelihood that he will fold to us. So we're not going to get any more value out of him. But if we check, he might actually try to take a stab at us. Either for value, he might think that his queen, if he's got a queen in his hand or a 7 in his hand, is actually the best hand here, and he might get us to fold a queen. He's trying to value or bluff us. Or he might think that his queen is actually good. If he's got a queen, if he's got queen 10 in his hand, he may actually think he's best and can extract a little bit of value out of us if we've got jacks, for example, or 10s or 9s or something like that, and we've just got a little crazy with two-barreling there. So a check actually is the right play here, and that's in fact what happens. Is that we think about it for a little bit, actually click the half pot button and started to size our bet, and then in the end said, nope, checking's the right play here. And indeed, the villain thinks about it for a little bit and then says, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and take a stab at this pot. Now, I think we make a mistake here. I think we actually are supposed to re-raise. Instead, we just call. Re-raising probably gets him to fold, but again, if he's got a weak ace, he might just call there, and that's the right play. So we made a little mistake there on the end by not re-raising, check raising on the river. But the check to induce a bluff is a really good play there. Again, it's not something that I think you should do super often in these games. That's called fancy play syndrome, and this is a tactic that's really best suited for mid-stakes and above, where you're really trying to outlevel your opponent and get him to make a mistake like that, and so on. Probably a mid-stakes player, a good mid-stakes player, is going to see right through that. It's just going to check behind. But here at the micros, the players are pretty bad in general, and this particular player, we said he was a decent player for the micro-stakes games, is where we pegged him to begin with. And good players sometimes get a little carried away at these stakes and think that they can bluff us off of a hand, and that's in fact what happened there. So again, when you've got a value hand, 9 times out of 10, 95 times out of 100, 999 times out of 1,000, I don't know what the ratio is, you should be betting for value. But you really have to know the why. You have to say, okay, I'm betting for value, which means I think I can get worse hands to call here. And in this particular case, very few worse hands are actually going to call. So yeah, we've got a value hand, but betting for value is not appropriate. And in this particular case, checking's the right play. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thanks for tuning in. Leave us a comment. Give us a like. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. It helps motivate me to produce more of these. I like producing them, but they do take some time, and I'd like to get some feedback from you folks. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.